Max wasn't feeling so chirpy at the end of the afternoon. He was hungry, and he had failed to convince anyone to hire him. He started out confidently enough. He'd ridden his bicycle out of the old city into the new town, thinking that the people there would have more groceries delivered to their grand homes, would send more flowers to one another, would have more restaurants needing daily or even twice daily deliveries of bread and rolls. Most of the butchers and bakers, greengrocers and florists he had talked to had been polite, even sympathetic. "I know what it's like being short of the ready," they said. "Never was a university student myself, but I've had to go without in my day. Good for you, young man, having the gumption to do something about it. Leave me your name and where I can get in touch with you. I don't need someone now, but you never can tell." So he wrote it down, Max, 5 Thieves Alley, and they put the piece of paper in a drawer and turned back to their customers. The cooks in restaurants were not so kindly. "You think I don't have a boy to do that?" they asked him. "You think my son or cousin or nephew or grandfather can't do that and keep the work in the family? You think I can afford to hire some university student who's going to end up with a high-paid job in some fancy office when all's said and done, to do work any idiot can do? You're supposed to be smart, you students. Get out of my kitchen and figure it out for yourself." It was a relief to lean his bicycle against the steps by his own back door, drop his cap onto his own kitchen table, and cross over to Grammy's kitchen for supper. It was good to be welcomed by the rich smells of beef stew on the stovetop and biscuits in the oven, and look into the face of someone who smiled to him, or smiled to see him. "Any luck?" Grammy asked. Then, "Do you want a piece of cheese to keep the wolf away?" "No," Max answered, and "Yes, please." While they waited for the biscuits to come out of the oven, Grammy reported to Max about her afternoon's activities. "I sent a telegram to Bombay. I don't know if you know that librarians are great joiners. We are, and we have many associations we can join, and every association has its own publications. So there are pamphlets listing the addresses of libraries all over the world, along with the names of their librarians. University libraries too, not just the ones for public readership, and law libraries, medical libraries, private libraries, but only the libraries for a wide public readership might answer. That's what I think. Anyway, I sent telegrams to Bombay and to Colombo." She helped herself to a chunk of cheese and added, "And I asked at Kyrgyz as well." "About the Maharaja of Kashmir?" Max asked. "Why would I do that? We already know he doesn't exist. What I asked about was those 3 ships, the Miss Koala, the Eastern Star, and the Simon Bolivar. I asked to be told when they landed, and if there was anything newsworthy about them or their passengers. I asked them, in short, to do a little research for me. Librarians love researching things, so I hope I'll hear back soon." She was pleased with herself, Max could tell, but still. She was shaking her head to tell him. "Although what I'll hear back, I don't know, nor when. Now, you tell me about your afternoon." With a little food in his stomach and a dinner almost ready to come to the table, Max could make a report of, if not success, at least many attempts. Grammy was sympathetic. "It's not easy finding work." Max didn't argue about that. They ate in friendly silence. "Good" was about all Max said, and "Thank you," Grammy answered. "Do you want seconds?" Max asked when he got up to refill his bowl. When they were both satisfied, Grammy said, "I've been wondering wouldn't you be happier if you at least slept here? You could still live over there, but what about sleeping here?" Max, who had had the same idea, responded quickly. "No, but I'll help with the dishes," he said, before he had any time to think of how much he'd rather not spend all of another night absolutely alone. All right, but what about your breakfast? I bought food, and it's not as if I have so much money I can afford to waste anything. You could bring it over here. I could, Max agreed. It would be easy to do that, and he also knew he'd sleep better in Grammy's house. Then why, he wondered, didn't he want to say yes and feel safer, feel taken care of, feel cared about? It was because of that middle feeling, Max realized. In the shipwreck of his life, letting someone take care of him would sink him. It would drown him. It would finish him off. He couldn't let Grammy see that he was wavering, so he smiled and said, "How can I find my father's fortune if I'm not there on the spot to search for it day and night and protect it from marauders?" Grammy laughed at the well-worn family joke. "All right, it's up to you. You know where I am if you need me." Max kept it going a little longer. In a voice that shook with the horror of it, he said, "Are you implying that you don't believe in my father's famous fortune?" "I'll take you up on the offer to wash dishes," Grammy answered. In his own dark house, in his own bed, Max lay stiff and still, trying not to think about his parents. Where were they? What were they up to? Were they actors or victims? Would they get in touch with him and explain? And not to think about the failures of his own afternoon, and especially not to think about the little house across the back garden, where he would not feel so alone. Six, in which Max earns a princely sum. On Tuesday, the 6th morning, after his parents sailed without him, Max's bad luck held firm. He found no employment. He went to hotels, to laundries, to hardware stores, to bookstores and stationery stores, and even a department store. "No experience? None at all?" they asked, shaking their heads in amazement at his foolishness and expecting to find work under those circumstances. "Try around the corner. Tell them I sent you," he was told. "But does that imbecile mean to insult me? Does he imply that my people are inexperienced?" He was greeted around the corner. In desperation, he asked for work at a clothing store. The manager didn't even bother to ask his name. He eyed Max's shabby boots and wrinkled trousers. "I could clean. I could sweep, polish countertops, wash windows," Max pointed out. But not with much hope. The manager put a hand on Max's elbow and ushered him out a side door. "Try in the old city," he advised. "They're not very particular," and he turned away. Max hadn't packed any lunch, so he bought himself a meat pie at a street-side stand and rode into the park that formed the centerpiece of the architect's design for the new town. This large green space had broad grassy lawns, bright flower beds, and 2 fountains. Tall shade trees under which benches had been placed lined the walks. Max chose an empty bench, leaned his bicycle against the nearest tree, and sat down to consider what he might try next, as he removed the heavy paper from his lunch. The park was too big to seem crowded, although a throng of people had come out to enjoy this mild spring midday. Businessmen having important conversations, women with small children and large dogs picnicking together on blankets, young shop assistants of both sexes strolling about and laughing, keeping an eye on other young shop assistants of both sexes who were strolling about, looking back at them. Max took a bite of the meat pie. It was terrible. He almost spat it out onto the ground, but he had paid for it, so he made himself chew and swallow. The crust was thick and sticky, the gravy thin and greasy, the meat gristly. The coins he had spent for it would have been put to better use being dropped with a wish into one of the park fountains. He could stand to eat only half, but that was food enough to see him through until he went home to meet with his math tutor. There was bread in his own kitchen, or he might stop in at Grammy's house first, where the icebox and cookie jar were always full. Lazily, feet stretched out before him, checked cap pulled down low on his forehead, he watched people on the paths enjoying the fine day. City sounds were muffled here, so it was the cries of children and the barking of dogs that filled the air, against a soft, steady background sound of splashing water from the nearby fountain. 3 men walked by him, deep in conversation. Watching them, Max had the idea to ask if businesses might need a messenger to carry important papers and packages between the new town and the old city, the harbor, the courts, the mayor's office, the hospital. Or he might get himself a little cart and sell his own meat pies. Grammy was sure to have a recipe. Or sandwich rolls filled with cheese and tomatoes. Those would be popular here in the park. Or oranges and bananas from a tray. And he had drifted off to sleep. When your dreams have disturbed you, alone in an empty house, even a bad lunch can make you drowsy. But it was only a little light snooze, and Max was pulled gently out of it when he sensed that he was being stared at. Slowly, warily, he sat up. The staring eyes were big and brown as boots. They did not blink. Their face was unsmiling and topped by wispy light brown hair. The body looked almost too small for its head, being so short in the limbs and so narrow at the shoulders. A child, Max realized. A very young child. "Hello," he said, and smiled. The child wore a loose red cotton blouse, short white pants, and high white shoes made of soft leather. He stood directly in front of Max, staring. "What's your name?" asked Max. There was no response. Max looked around. No adult hovered nearby, keeping a careful eye on his child. No mother, no nanny, grandmother, nursemaid, no sister or brother, not even a large family dog. In every direction there were children in sight and adults around them, but they were all at a distance. "Where's your mommy?" he asked. There was no response, no change in the child's serious, staring expression. "What did you do with a child alone and too young to talk?" Max asked. "You want to come sit up here with me?" and patted the bench beside him. The child lifted his arms, which Max took to mean yes. He bent over to pick him up and set him on the bench beside him, where he sat quite happily, hands clasped in his lap, legs sticking straight out. Max wondered if he'd have to stay where he was with the child until the parent or guardian realized he was missing and came looking. "What's your name?" he asked again. But the child was busily considering the view from the new height and paid no attention to Max. "My name is Max," Max said. He tapped his chest with his forefinger. "Max, can you say that?" The child smiled, showing 4 little white teeth emerging from his upper gums and 4 from his lower. "Ma," he echoed, put his own hand on his own chest. "No, I'm Max. Who are you?" "Mama," the child told him. Max laughed. "You can't be Mama." "Dada," the child suggested cheerfully. A different approach was needed, obviously. Max asked, "Where's Mama?" "Ma," the little boy answered, and then, satisfied with their conversation, turned his attention back to the park spread out before them, studying it and apparently thinking. Should he take the child to the police, Max wondered. He knew that was the logical and the natural thing to do, but the police would ask him questions, and he didn't want to answer any questions. This was developing into a problem, this child. He didn't think he should just put a child into his bicycle basket and wheel it across the park to Grammy's library, but she did know that policeman, Officer Torson, so if no better choice came along, in the end he could do that. But what if he started crying, frightened at the strangeness of a bicycle and the strangeness of Max? Could Max ride all that distance with a howling child and not be noticed? The child turned away from Max, twisted over onto his stomach, and slid backward to the ground. He looked up at Max, extended a very small hand to him, and said, "I," or maybe it was "I," or could it have been "I"? Obviously, he wanted Max to go with him, and Max didn't see that he had any choice. "I need my bicycle," he said, moving toward the tree trunk against which the bicycle leaned. "I," or "I," the little boy cried, impatient and cross, if a child that young could be impatient and cross, and he ran off, luckily not at much speed, letting the bicycle fall. Max caught up in 3 steps. "Wait, just for a minute," he said. "Wait. But I have to bring my bicycle. How about, do you want to ride? Zoom, zoom," he offered with a broad, swift swing of his arm. That interested the child. "In the basket?" Max offered. Also, that way he couldn't bolt off again. He was beginning to see how the little boy had managed to get separated from his grown-up. "Basket?" he offered again, holding out his hand to the child. "Bicycle?" Luckily, the child liked the idea and took Max's hand. "Ma," he said contentedly, and pulled Max back to where the bicycle lay. Max stood the bicycle up and let the child spin the foot pedal around and around for a while, then jam his short arms through the spokes of the wheel. At last he raised his arms and gave an order. "Uppy, uppy." Max lifted him up into the basket, folding the remarkably flexible legs to fit the basket's shape. Excited now with everything being so new again, the child pointed, shouting, I," or I," or I." Max didn't dare mount and ride, so he held the handlebars and wheeled the bicycle along the path in front of the fountain. Twisting around in the basket, the child reached out to push at Max's right hand. "You want to steer yourself?" Max asked, and he had to laugh. "You're facing the wrong way, just in the first place, and you're much too short." He jabbed his chin at the child when he spoke those last words. Much jab, too jab, short jab. The little boy giggled and tried to jam his small fist into Max's mouth. Max wheeled the bicycle down the pathway, approaching a group of women who had small children running all around them. There he angled the bicycle so the child could see the group. "Mama?" he asked. "Ma," the child answered, and pointed away across the park to the road, reminding Max, "I." Then his mouth stretched out flat and wrinkled ominously. "I," he cried more loudly. Max thought he could come back to these groups later to ask if there had been anyone missing a child, but for now he wanted to keep the child quiet, which meant doing as he was told. He didn't want anyone noticing him, wondering about him, looking for explanations. He hadn't yet figured out what lies he could safely tell. He just knew what truths he had to keep hidden, so he kept moving. They went all around the park, along the paths, among the trees, around both fountains, and nobody claimed the child. When Max turned reluctantly back away from the road to approach the closest group of women and ask them what they knew, the child grew restless and impatient first. Then his mouth opened wide as his lips quivered, and his round brown eyes filled with tears. He began to wail. "All right," Max said. "We're going. Don't cry. Please don't." "I," the child sniffled. He twisted around in the basket and pointed. Max obeyed the pointing finger, moving carefully through the carriages, going along the roadway as he crossed Barthold Boulevard, lifting bicycle and child over the tram tracks. Now the child twisted his head around to look at the little shops lining the street. Max looked too, but saw no sign of a frantic mother. He saw fruit, books, and hats. He saw 4 men in suits seated around a table under a wide green and yellow striped umbrella, with plates of food and a waiter bending over to fill their glasses with water. He saw a sign with a chocolate ice cream cone that looked so real he thought he could eat it after his disappointing lunch. People who painted signs had to be good at it, he thought. and then he wondered if he might earn his living painting signs for stores or restaurants, bakeries, or even ships. As chandlers or ironmongers, blacksmiths, goldsmiths, silversmiths, all kinds of businesses needed signs to identify their products. Max admired a large painted wooden shoe hung out over the cobbler's doorway. He would ask Joachim if